Right. Hello, I am Jason Sizemore, editor and publisher of Apex Magazine and Apex Book Company. We are here today with Lesley Conner, who is our managing editor for both Apex Books and Apex Magazine. How are you doing today, Lesley?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm getting along. As you know, it's very busy times we're going through for the company right now.
That it is.
Yeah. Um, Appreciate you sitting down and chatting with us. I know that you have a lot going on, including a kid going off to college.
Yep, she's home this weekend for the first time, so it's
Wow.
exciting to have her home.
Will there be a lot of tears when she goes back on Monday?
Um, well, I'm gonna take her back tomorrow,
Oh,
and the likelihood of me crying for the majority of the drive home is pretty high.
oh, just on the
But I'll be
drive
by
home.
myself, so nobody will know.
Yeah, yeah. I have one that's a senior in high school, so you'll probably hear about me shedding tears about this time next year, or at least you'll be teasing me about it.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Um, so I kind of wanted to have you talk about your role as managing editor. I think a lot of people see, especially the magazine, see us as like a two-headed monster, and I would say, yeah, that's effectively true. Um, And to even hammer home that point, we're having you be the editor in chief of our November issue,
Yeah, I'm
which
really excited.
I'm glad. I think you'll do a great job, and I look forward to the issue coming out. Um, so, for people who may not be familiar with what a managing editor does for a zine, can you just give us a rundown of all the thousands of things you do?
Well, I manage our slush team and keep track of these submissions on a day-to-day basis. Our wonderful slush readers read every submission that comes through, and they decide whether or not they would recommend it to be published in the magazine or not. And I go ahead and I send out all of those first rejections because I don't feel like our slush team, who is all volunteers, are all looking for experience on, honing their own writing craft and learning about publishing, but they are volunteers. I don't feel like they should be the ones sending out rejections because sometimes you get some not so nice replies. So I send out all of those first round rejections, and then whatever they recommend goes into my pile. And I read everything that's recommended and kind of whittle that down to a manageable pile to send up to you. So that is a very large part of my job, my day-to-day job, because I work on that every single day and spend probably at least half an hour if I'm just clearing through some rejections. Sometimes I can spend all day working on it, especially if I'm having a good day, a good reading day, and really trying to get through submissions so that I can pass the gems up to you. Beyond that, I find most of our cover art, which is probably the most fun part of my job because I get to spend all day looking at wonderful artwork, and I love that. My grandfather was an artist. My dad went to school for art. My daughter is going to college to get a fine art degree right now, so art's definitely a big part of my life, and it's something I really enjoy doing for the magazine. Beyond that, I help with marketing. You and I discuss the stories that come up to your queue, especially if there's one that maybe you're not 100% on, and usually that's when I'm like, ooh, now I get to convince Jason that this is an awesome story,
I get to
which is
convince
fun.
him to make the right decision.
Which is really fun for me because it gives me a chance to really kind of dig in with somebody else who loves reading as much as I do and kind of pull apart a story and discuss what works and what doesn't work, and how would it fit in with other stories that we already have waiting for publication and all of that, which is just it's exciting and it's fun. Beyond that, I handle a lot of email. You and I both get a lot of email, and I try to be responsive to authors who email with questions, especially about the process. And sometimes it can be a slow process because we do get a massive amount of submissions. So our team does a wonderful job of getting through all of our submissions within the first day of when they were sent in to us. But if we're holding the story for further consideration, it sometimes can take a while because you and I have so many other things that we're keeping track of and that need to be done day to day for the magazine.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we give every story the proper consideration, that we're giving it a fair chance. So I try to respond very quickly when we have authors who are emailing to question like, hey, where is my story in the queue?
I would like to say that sometimes when we're reading a story that we really like but we're kind of on the fence on it, we will read it and then be like, okay, I'm gonna set this aside for like 3 weeks. And there are times where I'll read it again and be like, I love it, but I'm gonna read it again 2 weeks. So it's not always just the editor setting on the story just to be setting on it. It's because we want to feel how we remember it after a few weeks, right? So
right. Well, that's when you and I will start. Because a lot of times you're reading stories maybe a month or so after I've read them.
Yeah.
So if you're like, hey, I want to talk about some particular story, if I immediately remember what that story was and why I loved it, that's when I'm like, oh yeah, now is the time to why I need to convince Jason that this one.
That's usually a good sign for the story.
Right, like if you remember it clearly, because I read so many stories every single month for the magazine, like for work. And then on top of that, I read a lot outside of work. So for me to clearly remember a story, that's a pretty good indication.
It's an accomplishment on behalf of the writer.
Definitely. And so those are the ones that I get super excited to be like, okay, we need to discuss this, because if I'm this excited about it, then I think other readers will be this excited about it. So yeah, I mean, I do that for the book side of the company. I do a lot of sales reports, royalty reports, which is kind of funny. It's completely different than reading submissions, but I, for some reason, really enjoy it. Like, I'm like, oh, let me read stories and now let me go play with numbers.
Yeah, full disclosure to the viewers, she kind of requested that job as a counterbalance to the type of like mental work that reading and considering all the stories in the magazine took versus the repetitive and I'm going to say more concrete processes involved with compiling data.
It's one of those things, like when you're reading stories, and I'm noticing this as I'm putting together my issue for November. I've selected 6 original pieces for November already. I've sent out the acceptances.
So you're a lot faster than I am.
But there is this part of me that even though I have been, helping select stories for years now, there's still this part of me that's like, what if I was wrong? Like, what if this story, because I am used to having you as a filter as well, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so as excited as I am about every single story that I have for my issue, there's that part of me that's like, what if nobody else will be as excited as I am? Whereas when I'm working on sales reports and stuff, there's no ambiguity. Like, the numbers are what the numbers are.
Yeah.
So it's especially if I spend my morning, because typically I work in slush and reading submissions early in the morning and working on email. By after lunch, my brain is like, I need something that's just, it's right. Like, these are the numbers and this is what the data says. And it just gives my brain a break. Which then, of course, then I have time to start thinking about like all kinds of marketing things, like how can we boost sales on this, and how can we get the name of this book out better, and stuff. So then, of course, my brain's working on other stuff, but it's a break, and I like it. So that is, I did, request to get to do that stuff because I need it to balance out the other work. Like if I was only like writing posts or reading stories continuously, my brain would become a puddle and I'd be useless to all of us.
Yeah. Well, that's the one thing about publishing is, like any kind of business that has a lot of different arms to it in terms of, creative and business. There's always a variety of chores and tasks to do.
Oh, always. There's never a day that I sit down to work and I think, I don't have enough to do today. Like I'm never looking for work.
Yeah. About the anxiety on stories that are selected, for me, this is why I find you to be invaluable to the Apex magazine process, is that being able to discuss with a trusted fellow reader about the nitty gritty, really, of stories, not just, we're talking far beyond just the mechanical level, but like from metaphor to metaphor in the story to thematic issues, tonal problems, just more advanced things of that nature. Even having you as someone to bounce these off of, I mean, every issue, while I am extremely proud of the 6 stories that we're presenting, there's always,
There's always, you just, until you put it out there, you don't know how, like, you can tell how you read it and how it affected you, but you don't know until it's out there how other people are going to read it and whether or not it's going to hit or not, more or less. And there's, not that it happens often, but there's nothing worse than having a story that you've published that you're so super excited about, and it's like it falls flat. Like nobody, like, you're expecting this love for it, that other readers are going to be just as excited as you are, and you really can't even begin to guess at that, because like you and I sometimes will be super excited about a story and be like, oh, everyone's going to love this story. And then it's like crickets and you're just like, why? Like, what happened? Like, well, why do people don't understand what a masterpiece this is? You're just like, why?
It's like that every issue. There's always that one story where like, oh, I can't wait for everyone to read this.
Yeah.
And then
to get excited and you're just hoping that there's going to be like Twitter conversations that you can jump in and be like, I know, wasn't that amazing? Pretty much as a reader, that's what I want to say about everything. It's like,
yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Something I wish that would happen is if that there were more like intellectual discourse about short fiction, genre short fiction at least,
Yeah.
on social media and beyond what is happening, with the reviews in Locust and um, Tor.com and other Apex, since we run a short fiction review as well. Um, I would really geek out to that, and I think that kind of stuff can be invaluable for writers to see, what editors and other people, professional reviewers, have to say about certain stories.
Well, I mean, I wish that the conversations that you and I have privately, like before we accept a story, the part where we're picking it apart piece by piece to find the strengths and the things that maybe that need to be worked on and stuff. Like, I wish that those were more conversations that happened on social media. Just and not to tear a piece apart. Like, I'm not talking about tearing it down. I'm just talking about like celebrating like the really cool. We've published so many pieces this year that have such a powerful statement on our society and on like social media and how we treat women in society and body image and all of those things that we have had some really incredibly powerful stories. And I wish that those are the conversations that we could then have a discourse with our readers. Because like those are the parts that we're getting so incredibly excited about behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and they're the conversations that I'd like to see brought out. And like I said, in no way, I'm not talking about trying to tear apart a story and pick it apart and like, that's not what I'm what I'm wanting. But I'm more wanting that like really intelligent conversation about why this story is so important and why it really works in this discourse that we're seeing in the greater society around us. I mean, I just think that would be really cool. But as like the editor who helped pick it, I don't feel like I'm the person who can start these conversations, because then it just feels like this gigantic pat on the back where you're like, look at this amazing story that we published. Like, we're so great. Like, I don't feel like we can start those conversations.
I
They
agree.
need to happen organically.
We can be a part of them, but we...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We can definitely be a part of them, but I don't feel like it's our space to, like that's not our place. That's not what we need to be doing. Like, those types of stories need to happen organically within, Twitter or wherever they would be.
Yeah. Good point there. So, I had you as like kind of my fall guy for when I select stories. Now you're doing the November issue, except it wasn't like a role reversal.
No, there's no fall guy.
Yeah, you don't have a fall guy or a fall person.
No, if people don't like the stories, then it's sorry, it's all me. Jason will be like, "What's this story?" I'll be like, "It's amazing. You love it."
What I find interesting though is you never really expressed that you wanted a like a temporary managing editor to talk about the stories and go over, okay, here's how we're going to order them and all that stuff. You were just like, okay, these are stories I want.
Well, it came together. Well, okay, first of all, let's be honest. This whole thing came together super fast. It was like Monday you were like, hey, would you like this opportunity? And by Tuesday I knew what stories I wanted. And then my entire week got away from me because of the pandemic.
Yeah, life stuff.
So it once the opportunity came up, I kind of knew what I wanted to say with the stories, and it was very, because I was so like, I'd obviously read everything that was in your queue waiting for you to read, so it was very easy for me to go through and be like, these are the ones that I feel go well together. I mean, I guess a little sneak peek, they all have to do with identity in different ways. And so it was very easy for me to be like, ooh, these will all fit together really well. But I knew I needed to move quickly because, I know everybody's like, it's only September, but I have like a month to get everything done. And that includes all the editing and getting everything together and the cover art and the interviews and everything.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to hesitate when I felt like I already knew what I was doing. Because if I did, then that was going to put me behind schedule. I wanted to get stories out there, get them accepted, get the ones that I wanted for interviews over to Andrea Johnson so that she can read them and get questions to the authors. I found artwork Thursday, emailed an artist that I want.
I've seen that artwork. It's incredible.
I'm excited about it. I'm sending the contract for that on Monday or later. I might do it after this. So that then I can get that to Russ Dickerson and he can get that interview going. Like, I just didn't feel like there was time to hesitate. I just needed to kind of hit the ground running and go.
It's very impressive that you were able to, because basically what you're saying is you did my job and your job in like 3 days. So I'm just the person that's slowing you down.
I'm like, move out of my way, Jason.
Yeah.
Move out of my way. I know how this is gonna work. In my head, I'm already writing my editorial.
So one thing that we try our best to be at Apex Magazine with writers is to be as transparent as possible. And we go as far as, providing like a flowchart graphic on the submissions page explaining, what to expect at each level, what's happening at each level. But writers still often have questions about how our from the front door to the back door process works. So, as managing editor, would you care to give like a brief rundown?
Sure. I mean, when you first, we don't accept emailed submissions. All of our submissions go through Mockshaw, through our submission portal, which you can find the link to on our submission guidelines page on the website. Once a story is submitted through Mockshaw, it basically gets put into a pile of, it goes to the end of the list of all the stories that have been submitted. We have a team of, I think, about 20 slush readers, first readers, who they go through and read the oldest submissions first. And they may jump ahead a little bit, but not a whole lot, depending on, like, if somebody sits down and they know they've got 15 minutes to read. And if the next story is like 6,000 or 7,000 words long, they're probably going to skip that one and go to one that's a bit shorter. Because, again, we want to make sure we're giving each story the time and the consideration it deserves. So if they know they only have 15 minutes to read, they're not going to start a super long story. They're going to jump ahead to one that's like 2,000 or 3,000 words. So they know they have the time to actually read it all. But for the most part, we read the stories that have been waiting in the submission pile the longest first. They read a story and they make the decision, would they recommend this for publication, or do they not feel like it's a good fit for us? If they're questioning, we have a private Discord channel, and they'll ask the other slush readers. They'll say, hey, I'm reading this story. Could someone please give me a second read? And I can see the discussions between them, and it's really great because they'll be like, oh, I see why you like this story, but, the ending fell flat for me, or I didn't, something. And they'll be like, okay, and that helps them kind of make that second determination. Like, they get us another pair of eyes on it. Once they've made that determination, if they recommend a story, it comes up to me. And I send an email and I let everybody know, I let the author know, like, we're holding your story for further consideration. I read the stories in the order they come, like in submission order. So I'm reading the oldest ones that are in my queue first.
So there's no cherry picking or anything?
No. I mean, again, if I know I'm getting short on time, like especially if it's like, sometimes at the end of the day, I might be like, oh, I have time to read one or two more stories before my daughter gets home from school. If the story is super long, I might be like, all right, I'm going to hold off on that one because I don't want to be trying to speed read to try to finish it before she gets home, because I read best when the house is quiet and there's no one else here. But other than that, I read pretty much how they come through. And then you are either going to get a rejection stating that, it's not for us, or you're going to get an email that says, hey, I love this story. I'm sending it up to Jason. And then it's on to your desk. And I believe, all of the stories that you see, I hope that I'm doing a good enough job, that they're all real. Like, if you get up to Jason's desk, I obviously feel like your story is worth publishing. Like, I'm not going to send something to Jason that I don't feel like I would be proud to see in Apex, and that I don't feel like would be a good fit for us. So making it that far in the process, even if Jason then later sends you a rejection, send that story back out, like, because it's good.
Yeah.
But then, after that, it's we're sending emails all the way. So if you don't get an email from me that says, hey, we're holding it for consideration, then you know that one of our members of the slush team was the ones who was like, no, this isn't a good fit. But I have to tell you, our slush team is one point. I sometimes now feel like I'm sending too much to you because they're getting so good that I'm loving pretty much everything they're sending up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're blessed to have a very professional and very dedicated slush team. We've always seemed to have had a really good slush team, but this latest iteration, since we came back from break, this new group has been incredible. And there's very little turnover, too.
Yeah, no, we've had some people since we've come back that have dropped out, but I keep reminding the slush team, I'm like, you guys need to let me know if you feel like it's too hard to keep to that 30-day turnaround window. But so far they're killing it. They're able to turn the stories around and give everybody that submits an answer of some sort within 30 days, whether we're holding it for consideration or we're passing on it. And as long as they're doing that, I don't feel like we need to necessarily bring anyone new in, because this team has worked incredibly hard to really learn what it is that Apex is about. And I credit a lot of that to our Discord group, because in our Discord group, like I said, they can ask each other for second opinions. Any story that I bump up to Jason, I let the team know. That way they can go in and read like what kind of stories are making it past me. And then we have a channel where, Jason can kind of be like, okay, this I passed on this story and this is why. And they've really taken this information that we're giving them, and they've used that to hone their skills so that the stories that they're sending up are just so incredibly ripe for Apex that it really becomes really difficult on my end to not be like, here, Jason, here's 100 stories for your queue because they're all awesome. Like, I'm really having to make sure that I'm thinking and being even more selective than I was before.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like I didn't just frivolously send stories up to you, but I'm even having to work harder than I did.
Yeah, I have seen the improved quality of stories in my queue, which certainly starts with slush readers sending you the really good stuff. I would like to encourage any BIPOC people to apply to be a slush reader. I feel like working to have diverse perspectives on the editorial team is always kind of a challenge, as I think there's a perspective in that publishing is not very welcoming to um, minorities or disadvantaged people. Um, so allow us to disabuse you of that notion. We really want a diverse reading crew, diverse editing crew. So if you want to be a part of the Apex Magazine experience, I'll just say, uh, certainly let us know. We're always interested. Um, so it is now 30, 30 minutes into the conversation. If our table viewers have any questions, you're welcome to submit those and we will do our best to get to them. And if not, then Lesley and I will continue. Um, she and I can probably do this literally for 12 hours straight. That happens when you work with someone for so long and your brains are simpatico and ready for the next question.
Sure.
Okay. So, what is your take on our Snap Judgment quarterly program kind of thing? So, to catch everyone up, Snap Judgment is a 3-person panel. Lesley and I, and a third guest editor from outside of the Apex circle, because we want different perspectives. We have a moderator read to us the first 250 words of a submitted story, and after that is finished, we tell the viewers whether or not we would keep reading and the why and why not of it. So, how scared were you when we first started doing this?
It's super scary. It's super scary to be on the judgment side of it, and I know it's super scary for the writers to be submitting. Because 250 words, first of all, that's not very much. And second of all, like, you literally are making a snap judgment. And I found, so we did a practice run where our awesome slush team sent in stories, and it was, private, obviously, because it was practice. And during that one, I didn't have anything in front of me. Like, I wasn't reading along with the person reading the stories to us. And I found it easier in that time to be able, because basically what the thing is, if I would stop reading before the end of the 250 words, you put your hand up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found it easier to put my hand up then because I was just listening. I wasn't reading it on the page as well. But then during the live event, I was trying to read along with each submission. And then when you're doing that in your head, you're like, okay, I need to sound intelligent. I need to have good points.
Yeah, because you're levying judgment, so you want to sound smart when you do it.
Right, you want to sound like you know what you're doing, where people aren't like, why do they let this person do anything with this magazine? Because she obviously doesn't know what she's doing. So I found that while I was spending my concentration and my brain energy trying to come up with good critiques, rather than having the forethought to be like, well, would I stop reading or not, and putting my hand up. So there were times, so we get to the end of the 250 words, and I'm like, yeah, I know I wouldn't have kept reading, but I was so trying to make sure that I had something to add to the conversation, because you don't want to be the panelist that's like, yeah, that was a really good point, and then just look to the next person.
Which
you want to make
you're allowed one or two of those. I know I did that a couple times where I just did not have a whole lot to add that sounded smart.
You're just like, yeah, that sounded great. That's what I was thinking too.
Mm-hmm.
But so you do during that live event that pressure to make sure that, one, you have something of value to add to the conversation, and that two, that it's not only of value to the conversation, but that you're giving critiques that are helpful to the writer. Like, I found like that, for me, that felt super important, to make sure if the writer is going to be brave enough to submit something to us and to allow us to do this kind of harsh, I mean, not mean, it's definitely not mean, but it is a very truthful, non-sugar-coated judgment live for everyone to see. You want to make sure that they're getting something out of it too, like that they're not just leaving feeling like, well, they just tore my story apart and said they wouldn't keep reading. You want to make sure that you add something to the conversation that they're going to be like, okay, now I understand how to strengthen this piece. Or maybe not even just this piece. Like, maybe it's something that they're going, okay, well, I can take what they said about this 250 words, and I can take that into further writing to help make sure that it's of value to them and not just something for us to put on our YouTube channel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not just for the person who submitted the work. It's for all the writers who may be watching to get a glimpse into an editor's mind of what we're thinking when we're reading the intro. And one of the most common reasons that people will receive a rejection is because the opening is very weak. And my goal is to provide a lesson in the many different ways you can mess up the opening. And it's very easy to do. It's very hard to write a great opening. So yeah, if you can learn that skill, then your ability to sell your fiction will certainly improve. That's my perspective on it.
But I will add, make sure your ending hits too. I will say, as an editor, there is nothing more disappointing than to be loving a story and to be just absolutely in my heart be like, oh, this story, Jason's going to buy it, and if he doesn't buy it, I'm going to go to Lexington and beat him up because this story really needs to be published in Apex. And then you get to the end and you're like, oh, well, they obviously didn't know where their story was going, because it's like the setup is so amazing, and then it's something with the ending just does not work. So yeah, beginnings are definitely, like, openings are definitely important, but you need to land that ending too.
This is true, and yeah, as an editor, it can be frustrating. A lot of times, though, I don't often ask for rewrites, but usually when I do, it involves like, do you want to tweak the ending a little bit? I didn't. I found it didn't quite work for me for this reason and that.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah, there's been a few times when I have just absolutely fallen in love with a story, and then for some reason the ending doesn't end. It doesn't catch me, and I don't often give personal rejections through the slush pile, because I read such a massive amount of stories through the slush pile. If I give everyone a personal rejection, I'd get nothing else done. But those ones are the ones where I'm like, I will say, this, I was loving this story, but the ending really needs something.
Mm-hmm. Kind of changing gears here. So we went on approximately 18-month hiatus due to my health issues. Fortunately, we came back, great Kickstarter and all that. And it felt like to me that a lot had changed in the zine genre world in the 18 months. I was wondering if you kind of agree with that or disagree, or is it the same as it ever was? Or
I'm going to be really honest and admit that I don't read a lot of zines outside of ours. I do read short fiction, but usually it's anthologies.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a reading goal and I like to be able to count it towards my reading goal. But yeah, so I'm really the most horrible person to ask this question, Jason, because I just don't pay attention to what's outside my bubble.
You're not. Well, for your sanity, it can be sometimes good to stay out of the social media conversations about genre.
And I do, and I mean, it is for my sanity, and it's also just because between what we do with Apex and then what's going on in just my day-to-day life, I don't have the time to kind of get invested in a lot of those conversations, because sometimes it feels like they can be all-consuming. And so rather than allowing myself to be drawn into that, I just don't.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Well, I struck out with that question. Sorry.
Well, I know. Well, I figure that if there's something super important going on, somebody's going to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Like you or Maurice or somebody is going to be like, hey, Leslie, this is going on. And I'll be like, oh. And then I'll get down the rabbit hole and figure out what's going on. But for the most part, I try to focus on getting what's on our plates completed. I mean,
yesterday I had the opportunity to speak with Marie Croak, who is, as you know, one of our submission editors, and she also sold a story to you for your issue coming out in November. Can you tell us a little bit about like how that story worked its way up to us, and like was it kind of odd working with the submission editor and accepting someone who was already kind of inside?
Yeah, especially when we have people who are new submissions editors or people who are applying to be submissions editor, a very common question I get is, can I still submit to the magazine? Or they'll assume that they can't submit to the magazine because they're working with us. And I always say, no, you're more than welcome. Go ahead and submit. There's 2 rules. 1, you can't slush your own story. Like, don't just automatically bump it up to me. And 2, you can't expect preferential treatment. Like, I'm not, when I'm reading your story, I'm not going to treat your story any differently than I do anybody else's story. Marie's story, it's funny because our first readers do not have to read the stories that they read. That's not something that I require them to do, but they're free to read them if they want to. And hers, I think, is probably the only story that we have gotten through the pile that the slush reader rated it a 10 out of 10. Like, I get 8s and 9s a lot. I'm pretty sure hers is the only one that has ever been rated a 10, which of course then you go into reading it, you're like, this story to get a 10, it better be amazing. Like, you set that bar higher.
Or you're thinking, if it's not amazing, then she's, the slush readers are showing a little bit of favoritism.
Right. And so, like, I kind of went in with this, like, side eye, like, a 10. Is this story really a 10? And it is. It's a fantastic, fantastic story, and I'm very excited to share it with the readers. And it kind of is the story that I once I knew I was putting together my own issue, I knew I wanted to publish that story, and we had another story by Izzy Wasserstein that I remember when I read it the first time, my note to you was like, this story would go amazing with Marie's. Mm-hmm. So I knew as soon as I decided I wanted to publish Marie's story in my issue, that I also wanted Izzy's story in my issue, and it was like the other stories just kind of fell into place around those two. So yeah, Marie's story is that one that I was like, I need that one. That one needs to go right here in my issue.
Yeah,
it's a great story. I can't wait for people to read it.
Can you share with us 3 stories that have come out this year that we have published that you would recommend to potential Apex Magazine readers, for them to get like a really good sense of what to expect?
Oh man, hold on a second. Make me put my coffee down. All right, hold on, because I got a little look at titles. To really get a good sense of Apex, I'd say The Cottonmouth by Joelle Wellington in the most current issue. I read that story and I immediately knew that you would buy it. Like, there was no question in my mind at all. Like, I think that's one of those stories that I read it and immediately sent you a message and was like,
it's like, I know you're buying this one, so just go ahead and read it and accept it.
I'll just wait. I'm going to stop working. I would like you to just go and read this story because it was just amazing.
So which part, though? What triggered that? Like the first couple lines, first 100 words, the story itself?
So this story, Jason really has a thing for stories that deal with religion in some sort of way. So, I don't want to get too much away about the story, but it just has to do, like... Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, the Southern Gothic nature, but mostly for me it was the voice and the way that Joelle took the original Russian folklore and twisted it into a kind of a parable for the way they trapped the switch and mistreated her and interpolated that with the sin of slavery and just like some of the subtle imagery of the three denials. Uh, Although in the interview Joelle says that was unintentional, I thought it was. When I read it, I was like, "This is brilliant! What a way to metaphorize, uh, you know, that story." So. Um, Plus, I love the way it ended too.
It's just one of those stories. Like, there are times when I'm reading stories that I am like, there's times that I'm reading stories where I'm like, this is a Lesley story. And then I'm like, if I have to fight Jason to get this story published, I will. Like, there are just times, there's certain stories. And then there's certain stories that I love them, but I'm like, this is a Jason story. Like, this is a story that I just know after working with Jason for nearly 10 years now. I know that this is a story that Jason's going to love. And so those are the ones that I'll send to him, and then I send him a message, and I'm like, hey, I just sent you this story, and I'm just waiting. like, I'm just waiting for you to read it because we need to discuss it now and not in a month when it just like makes its way up your queue. Like, you need to read this now because I know that it's going to knock your socks off. So yeah, Cottonmouth was definitely one of those stories where I was like, yeah, read this right now. Right now. Like, I'm going to stop work and I'm just going to stare at my chat screen until you've read the story.
Say, what? You got two more.
Two more. Okay. So,
what's a Lesley story?
There you go. Good.
That's the next one. Then a Lesley story, The Life and Death of Mia Fremont, an interview with the killer by A.K. Hudson. I absolutely love this story because it is it's subtle in a way of what it's saying. And it's one of those stories that I thought I was going to I felt like I'm going to have to convince Jason that we have to buy this story because the speculative fiction element in it is
it
so
can
subtle.
Be argued that it does not exist.
It can be.
Yeah.
But it's a story where I was like, holy shit, yes. Because more or less you have a police investigator who is going out to interview this woman who the family more or less claims that she killed herself. And she's like, I did kill, because she's killing off the societal expectations of what it means to be a woman. And she did kind of kill off that part that is always agreeable, that doesn't want to make a scene. And she's done it in such a way that her family is like some sort of creature or a doppelganger has taken over Mia Fremont's life, and they've killed her off completely. Like, they believe there's an actual murder. And the way I described it, there's no supernatural element. Like, there's no speculative element. And I knew that I was going to have to, because there has been many times where I will fall in love with a story that leans more horror, than sci-fi or fantasy, and Jason's like, there's no speculative element, and so I knew I was going to have to, argue my way through that one, because it was so well done, and it looked so intensely at what it means to be a woman in our society, and how a lot of it's just bullshit, that I was like, I need that story. So I love that story, and I will fight Jason to say that, yeah, it definitely, it's good. It needs to be in Apex Magazine. The third one I would say If Those Ragged Feet Won't Run by Annie Nergebauer. if you want a story that teaches you a master's class in pacing, that's the story. Like, that story starts at a dead run, and it doesn't let up for 1 second through the entire thing. And it is just...
Well, it does have short moments to allow the reader to catch their breath and to take in what the hell is going on, and then you're back off sprinting.
Right. Like, you barely have a chance to catch your breath, and it's just so well done. The pacing is so well done, and then the juxtaposition between the woman and her baby and this bird and its baby, it's just such a solid story that again, it was one of those stories that I knew that Jason would love it as much as I did. I mean, there are times when I fall in love with the story and I'm like, ugh, I know Jason's not going to love it as much as I do, but it's still a solid story. But yes, those three, I think, and those are all three very different stories. But I think that if people wanted to go and kind of get a little sample of Apex, those would be three really great ones to start with.
They all three feature very strong women.
Oh, well.
Yeah. That's good.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. Okay, well, it's almost 1 p.m. You've made it, Lesley. An hour of interrogation from me. You seem to be in one piece still.
Yep.
Thank you so much for doing this. I know you have a very busy weekend, and you have your daughter in visiting from college, so the fact that you were able to spend an hour with us is very appreciated.
You're welcome.
And to the viewers, Lesley's special issue where she takes the mantle of being editor-in-chief comes out this November. And I'm sure she would recommend that you check out October's upcoming Indigenous Futurist issue.
Definitely.
Yeah. And thank you very much. Follow Lesley at Lesley Conner on Twitter.